How's this for a nettle? Look at this one. Great big nettles. Yeah, some people don't like nettles. Well, they do sting. I stung myself earlier. Didn't really do me any harm. But the reason I'm showing you this is because the story I want to tell has got nettles in it as a, well, an important part of the story. They're useful things. The top, the more delicate bit at the top in the spring anyway, you can eat that. You wouldn't eat it raw. You'd boil it up or you'd steam it, a bit like spinach. And the stem, well, the fibres you can get from the stem of the nettle, they are very, very strong, and you can make clothes out of them, make ropes out of them, all sorts of things. And this story, well, nettles grow in all sorts of countries all around the world. And so they do come into stories a bit. They come into this story. It's a fairly well-known story, I think, but I heard the story from a girl, a storyteller called Nour, and I want to tell it kind of the way I heard it from her, although when I tell it, it'll come out my own way. That's what stories do, isn't it? They pass on from person to person to person. And Nour and her sister Lama, they were telling stories online in the year 2020. And they were telling their stories from Palestine. And very clever, I thought, because, well, they were telling their stories in English. You asked me to tell a story in Arabic, well, I'm afraid I wouldn't get very far, would I? So these clever girls, these great storytellers, were telling this story. And, well, Lama was telling a story about Aladdin. And Nour was telling the story I'm about to tell. And I'm telling Nour's one because when she was telling that story, she had a parakeet standing on her head. And I have never before seen or heard a storyteller tell a story with a parakeet standing on their head. I thought that was great. And I think, if I remember right, she started the story with Once Upon a Time. Well, why wouldn't you? And once upon a time, there was a king and the queen, and they had... How many children did they have? Well, they had 11 boys and 1 girl, so that makes 12 all in all. The name of the girl was Diana. I don't know what the names of the boys were. There's too many to remember. And the king, well, sadly, I'm afraid the queen died. And the king, he remarried. It's what kings do in stories. And the new queen, she didn't like those children. She was especially jealous of Diana. And she sent her out, she sent her away to live with peasant people on the far, far side of the great, great forest. And then she looked at the boys and thought, what to do with them, what to do with the boys. And she knew how to cast spells because she was a wicked queen. Wicked queens know how to cast spells. That happens in stories. And she cast a spell that turned them into 11 swans. And they flew away and away and away and away until they came to a cave by the sea. And that's where they lived. And by day they were swans. At night they turned back into themselves again. But in the morning they'd be swans again. Well, one day Nour was working hard as she did. And who should come to her again, as they do in stories, but a fairy. And the fairy said, Nour, she said, I know where your brothers are, and I know what has happened to them. Yeah, the wicked queen turned them into swans, swans by day. And they live in a cave by the sea. So Nour, she left the farm where she was working, and she walked, 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 until she came to that cave by the sea. And there they were, the 11 swans. And at night time, they became her brothers. And so she lived with them in this cave. And then one day in a dream, the fairy came to her, and the fairy said, I know how you can turn your brothers back into themselves again. What you need to do is go to the graveyard, and you need to find nettles. And then out of the fibres from the stem. You know how to do this. You've been a hard-working girl. You need to make 11 clothes, or 11 coats rather, for your 11 brothers. And so she went to the graveyard and she found nettles, and she started to make coats for her brothers. And then one day, who should come riding by but a prince on a fine horse. You can imagine the prince riding along all dressed in his finery and all the courtiers riding behind him. And the prince looked and said, "What are you doing?" I'm making coats." Hey, he was so impressed by her skill that he said, "Well, you may come to the castle, my castle upon the hill, and make the coats there." Did you know? That is just what she did. And she sat there and she made the coats, and the prince, well, this is a story. The prince, he started to fall in love with her. But the ministers came to him. The politicians came to him and said, no, because we don't want you marrying a low peasant person like that. We don't want that. Send her away. And he said, no, I don't want to send her away. And they said, send her away. And so he came to her and he said, I have to send you away from the castle, because the ministers, the politicians, they don't like you being here. Now, she only had one more coat to make, or one more coat to finish. And she said, I need to finish this coat. And he said, yes, don't go now. Go in the morning. And so all that night, she made that coat. And then the morning came. And then what should come but the 11 swans flying over the castle battlements. And she took the coats and she gave them to the 11 swans, and they turned into her brothers, and she fell down, boom, in a faint. And when she awoke, there was a prince. And he said, "What is this? What has happened? Why? Who are these?" And she said, These are my brothers. And she told him the whole story. And he turned to the ministers, he turned to the politicians, and he said, "She will not be sent away. I will ask her to marry me." And so she did. And do you know what? They all lived happily ever after. And this is what Nour said at the very end, with a parakeet standing upon her head. She said, "The end." And she gave a great big smile, and I don't think I can give a smile as big as the smile that she gave. But I loved her version of the story.